So for you, this was absolutely perfect. We go to visit the Space Shuttle Pavilion at the Intrepid Museum in New York City, and we climb to the deck of this massive aircraft carrier. And who greets us but the Brewster High School Marching Band, playing none other than Michael Jackson's Thriller. It was kind of amazing, actually. I mean, in a matter of seconds, all of my nationalistic impulses were ignited. God, country, high school football. For me, however, it was quite different. I immediately thought about what our friend Nina Hauptman refers to as this guiltless parading that the Americans do. So I'm lucky in some ways to feel extremely uncomfortable about the way this museum unapologetically celebrates the military might of America. And you've got a more complicated position. On one hand, there is this body of research that you giddily compile about corporations with defense industry and NASA contracts, and then you have your own personal relationship to this space shuttle object. I remember you telling me that you witnessed the Space Shuttle Challenger explode with your primary school class during a live viewing that NASA had arranged? Well, we were in public school, but it was part of Reagan's Teacher in Space project, and this was the initiative that put Krista McAuliffe on that shuttle in the first place. As elementary school students, we had been a part of the nomination and selection process for who this teacher would be, and then you watched her explode on the television. But it's true. It was Reagan. He was trying to resurrect this ghost of President Kennedy's vision with the Star Wars program on the horizon. I remember this period vividly. It was totally scary. This reoccurring notion of American exceptionalism throughout the Cold War, the Americans making the world a safer place for democracy. And it's compelling now, especially in an election year, that the terms of this rhetoric have changed very little. Well, let's talk about that in a minute. Right now, I want to know about your first impressions. I feel this duality whenever I look at the space shuttle. It's an awesome feat of engineering that's complicated by the players involved in its inception. And given this historical context, this makes a lot of sense. So I'm curious, how do you remove yourself from your own knee-jerk responses to the Disneyfication of this thing and interpret its aesthetics? I couldn't really divorce the aesthetics of the space shuttle from its historical and current context as an object on display. I couldn't even really get far back enough to photograph the entire thing, so I tried to zoom in for the details, like the angles of the object itself, and try to analyze its paint job, for example, which to me recalled the 1980s trend of quoting the lines of mid-century modernism, which also reifies Reagan's telephone lines through time to Kennedy's space race, arms race rhetoric. Are you quoting the Indigo Girls, Hauptman? Well, yes, I was. But I can see what you mean here with the NASA logo and the Enterprise logos used on the space shuttle exterior. You see this with this round-over font style. Yeah, but once you get back to the safety labeling for crew rescue, they default to the defense industry standard font. So when I was looking for further evidence of this overlap in usage between military interests and the interests of NASA, I found the Northrop Grumman logo right there on the space shuttle. I always love these obscure details that you come up with. But tell us, why is this significant? Well, first, there are Northrop Grumman warplanes on display on the deck of the Intrepid. So the display itself implies that space exploration and military dominance is a seamless register, and we should accept that one source does it all. Northrop Grumman is significant because they developed the B-2 Spirit bomber, or stealth bomber as we called it back in the day, costing about $2 billion per aircraft. But later, I was thinking about President Kennedy's own language that portrayed the space race in a very particular way. If we think about JFK's speech at Rice University in September of '62, the space race was in essence a race for the peaceful domination of space, and if won, we could prevent the USSR from filling outer space with weapons of mass destruction, purportedly. Not to be overly reductive, but if we reduce this, basically, Kennedy was trying to portray the space race as morally good, because the USSR was morally evil. His approach to me seems duplicitous. Well, I'm not here to call Kennedy's administration duplicitous, But I do want to point out the mechanics of how these things get made, and that the construction of the space shuttle is strikingly similar to the construction of any warplane, even if it's an unarmed vehicle. It would probably be very easy to arm a space shuttle anyway, and certainly in one breath they were talking about the space race, while in the next they were talking about the arms race. I guess there's a case to be made about efficiency. Why not use the same contractors and scientists and rally all forces in pursuit of this goal? I wonder if anyone considers this to be a potential conflict of interest at the time. I would have a hard time making the case for an actual legal conflict of interest, but certainly we've had plenty of time to think about it. I mean, back in 1944, the tests involving the Bell Laboratories X-1 plane, it was a joint effort between the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics and the U.S. Army Air Force. This is Chuck Yeager and supersonic flight, right? Exactly. And during the later flights, they dropped the X-1 out of the bomb bay of a B-50, which was a retrofit of a B-29 Super Fortress, which is one of those planes that carried out the aerial bombardments of Germany during the Second World War. And this historical fact is advertised in a photograph on view next to the space shuttle. The military has become more and more explicit in stating their desire to dominate space for the purposes of war, I guess. Well, yeah, you can find evidence of this in declassified documents, like the Air Force Space Command Planning Document, Strategic Master Plan FY06 and beyond, and I'm paraphrasing here. The ability to exploit space while selectively disallowing it to adversaries is critically important, and maintaining space superiority is an essential prerequisite for success in modern warfare. Sounds like this approach is more about a realpolitik than Wilsonian universalism. Well, that's what my father thinks anyway. And what is this bumper sticker? It will be a great day when the military has to hold a bake sale to build the bomber? Hauptman, you're bumming me out. Anyway, another interesting tidbit is that Rockwell Industries, the main contractor of the space shuttle, also built the Apollo spacecraft that sat on top of the Saturn V rocket, which was the same rocket that would have carried the Titan II warhead, which was the largest nuclear weapon that we ever deployed. And this Saturn V rocket, I think you'll find interesting, was designed by Wernher von Braun. Is it the cross-purposing of a civilian space exploration vehicle into a weapon of mass destruction that concerns you? Oh, it's more the cross-pollinating of everything. Vehicles, personnel, scientists. That's what gives me pause. Well, I agree with you. Something is definitely implied when former Nazi German rocket scientists are shipped to the United States to work on American missile research. Even more compelling is the fact that there wasn't enough political outcry to stop it. President Truman actually violated the Allied Potsdam and Yalta agreements to make the Nazi scientists legit. They expunged their Nazi records and simply granted these scientists security clearance and allowed them to work in the United States. It's like Slavoj Žižek would say. It's all about this mechanism of fetishistic disavowal. Huh? Well, he characterizes this term by the lines, "I know very well, but." So in this case, Truman says to himself, "We know very well that these men are former Nazis, but we have to act in the best interest of national security." Or, "I know very well that these men were Nazis, but they are also fantastic rocket scientists, and we need fantastic rockets." But to get back on subject, how did they decide to name the space shuttle the Enterprise? Well, let's talk about this for a minute, this process of naming the first shuttlecraft. Originally, it was going to be called the Constitution, but there was a massive campaign on the part of this subculture called the Trekkies. These obsessive fans of the science fiction television program Star Trek. I went to a convention once. Exactly. And these individuals wanted the shuttle to bear the same name as the Starship Enterprise. Here we have this magical blurring of science fiction and science fact. In essence, this blurring obscures reality by rooting an actual spacecraft within the fantasy of this utopian television program. And there are several references to the Star Trek phenomena in the museum display on the Intrepid. One is a photograph that shows members of the original cast of Star Trek. I mean, Scotty, Mr. Spock, Captain Kirk, they're all there. And then there's the presence of Leonard Nimoy. Mr. Spock? Yeah, remember? Spock does the voiceover for the film that contextualizes the last 60 years of manned and unmanned space travel. Can you describe this short film? How could I have missed it? I have no idea how you missed it. It was on a TV in the middle of the exhibition. But, I mean, okay, so it's really strange because you have to sift through Mr. Spock's personality, and it's a filter that lends an air of logic to the content. So this content is markedly pro-progress, pro-innovation, and pro-ingenuity. And to get back to your previous statement, we are hearing a lot about this in the past weeks, this being an election year here in the United States. Yeah, from both candidates. There's a constant insistence on the notions of healthy competition and the spirit and ingenuity of the American people. And this is all they have to say to lull everyone into a state of compliance. Well, this year, ideology functions as it always functions. It's a 20th century argument anyway. Ideology is used to rally latent desires that are impossible. Politicians insist that they believe in things that don't exist. Like Father Christmas, the U.S. elections, one of many great fictions.